So while we are still looking ahead to that MPC meeting, we're also looking at state subnationals, talking about their generation of revenue and working hand in hand with the private sector. That's what we're discussing next. And we're doing that with the Chief Executive Officer of Modo Ante Limited. He's also the initiator of a Co-Revenue Plus Summit. Mr. Joko Okupe joins us here in the studio. Mr. Okupe, good morning. So we always... You're welcome to the program.
Thank you.
So a lot of times we've had to rejig or refocus because sometimes we expect so much from the federal government and we tend to forget that a lot of the resources in the country is being controlled by the states. And they have potentials, they are closer to the people than the federal, and they ought to also maximize the resources they have. Nigeria is a very great agriculture-rich country, the different states and all of that. How would you at this time score states, governors, government in the area of revenue generation?
Not very, very good. Not very, very high. Because just like you said, there is still room for a lot more to be done. Thinking a little bit outside of the box. Getting a bit more innovative with approaches that need to be taken, such that there's not additional burden on citizens, but there are new openings, for revenue generation that can be exploited.
So what are those openings? We're talking about PPP now, working obviously with the private sector. Right. What are some of those openings that will not increase the burden? Because we've seen taxes, introduction of taxes, and obviously at a time like this, we're dealing with energy costs in the country, we're dealing with food costs in the country. So introduction of a new burden on any individual or even companies, it doesn't seem like a good idea.
Right. Well, if government considers going into value exchange services, initiatives that somehow makes government to render services to the people at a rate that they can afford and that will actually enhance their lives and livelihood. If you look at the technology space, for example, the digital space, for example, in the economics of the world, there's so much that is happening in that space, that government can tap into, such that income generation or revenue generation does not even necessarily come from the citizens alone. The digital platform is a global platform. There's always need for people that want to do things outside of the country to get information of what's happening in the country, to get valuable input. And within the framework of government, there are so many of such platforms that can be created, that can begin to generate new streams of income for the state.
And another thing that comes to mind is electricity. We know that Nigeria's electricity law has been tweaked, giving authority, regulatory authority to states. And of course, one expect that they will work with the private sector. But I wonder issues of huge capital needed, bureaucracy in getting licenses. I wonder how much of a hurdle that could be, even with the renewed electricity law.
Yeah, a lot of the states are still trying to wrap their heads around that law in terms of trying to get the nitty-gritty of how exactly it's going to operate. But there are also developments technologically, even in the energy generation, energy sector of the world, that makes it possible for energy to be provided in clusters, such that you are not engaging in establishment of huge infrastructure. Now, if that comes in and there is an enabling environment that government creates, for the partners, to come in, it obviously should be something that should work. If, for example, we pick a cluster like where Channels is, and all that provider is doing is providing energy for this enclave alone, that becomes a lot more manageable. So we believe that there are quite a lot of opportunities and flexibility, but it's a PPP thing.
And I hear you say, if the government will make the environment enabling environment, which has always been the complaint of the private sector in the country. We have a lot of Nigerians who actually have the capital, but when it comes to the enabling environment, An investor wants the certainty that if I go into this line of business, I will make profits.
Right.
You know, we've heard of policy flip-flop. That's on the one hand.
Right.
And I mean, pardon me, we're in Lagos, but for a state like Lagos, you had an issue of multiple taxation, both from the government agency and the non-state actors. And these are, you know, some of the challenges that deter investors, even when we have these bright ideas and the need is all over.
Right. For example, in the summit that's been put together for Lagos, one of the things that we've considered very, very closely is that within government, there should be a deliberate and intentional function that helps investors liaise with various arms of government. Because some of the challenges that the investors have or the private sector has is in having to relate with multiple departments, agencies, and ministries of government. Now, if we create a dedicated desk of function, you know, within government that takes over that responsibility, you know, on behalf of the investors or the private sector, it's just a matter of handing over to them, you know, what exactly they need to get done, what they need to get done, without them having to move from one department, one agency, one ministry to another. It's one of the things that the Office of the Special Advisor on Revenue and Taxation and Revenue is trying to put in place so that the outcomes of that conversation can be implemented seamlessly without too much headache and frustrations.
You know, since we now know that you do have a connection with the Lagos State, we would like to plead with you to help us send a message to the Lagos State government. We had an exporter on the program last week,
right,
and he did complain that between maybe the heart of Lagos to Apapa Port, they have to pay about 20,000 naira in how many places to the non-state actors. If they don't pay, they break their glasses. That's, you know, transporting their goods to send out of the country. And they have taken this matter, it's not a new one. They've taken this matter even, you know, to maybe to the office of the governor, but nothing has changed. And of course, when exporters or investors see things like this, non-state actors are so powerful that it seems the state cannot do something about it. That is a major deterrent, you know, to investors.
Good information. I believe that there is a continuous information gathering. And in government itself keeps evolving, you know, from whatever it is that they were doing yesterday to what they're doing today. So I think that it's an issue that should be brought to the fore, you know, for a deeper conversation, you know, around it. Because sometimes the depth of conversation that you have around issues also indicates the seriousness, you know, of the issue. Now, within constructs, there's information that you give that should get to me as a result of the various chains between me and you. You know, whatever gets to me may have been completely diluted from what you intended to send out. So I will think that at some point in time, there should be an infusion of some more structured information management from the people to government.
Okay, so I get 2 points from you now.
Yes.
The first, you talked about creating like a one-stop shop for the private sector. The other is the management of information, which we see obviously the impact, judging from the experience of, it was one of the exporters who was on the program, but we know it's a common thing in the country. Now, if you were to speak to a group of private sector, you're from the private sector, in this, pushing the PPP strategy for state revenue, what would you advise them to look out for if they were to get into any agreement with the government?
Interesting question. I think the first thing is expectations need to be managed. Because in a lot of times, the private sector also gets carried away with the enthusiasm of their ideas, right? Not minding the practical dimensions of the implementation of some of these ideas. So I call it expectation management, you know, to say that, you know what, because there are some things that private sector requires that require legislation, you know, to be done. So no matter how anxious you are that, oh, you know, we have this fantastic idea and we want to get this thing done, pull back a little bit to know what the requirements are within the current framework of government, to get the things done. So that if there are legislation issues, to be handled before those things come to pass, then you know that whatever it is you are planning to do is not going to happen in 1 month, because there are processes that are in between. So I call it expectation management, and then of course opening up precisely to say that for us to do this and do this, these are what require. This is how this is how long it will take, for us to get it done. And if there is some good measure of transparency between government and private sector, I think it's not such a difficult thing to do.
All right, I think that sounds very realistic. Managing your expectation, very realistic. But thank you so much for sharing those tips with us. The Chief Executive Officer of Modo Ante Limited, Mr. Joko Okupe, and also initiator of Eco Revenue Plus Summit.
Right.
And we hope that you will take our message to Lagos State.
Yeah, the summit is meant to be...
No, I mean the message about,
that's what I'm saying.
non-state actors.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. Let them also try to participate in the conversation so that there is a direct ear that also hears.
All right. Thank you so much for your time this morning.
Have a good day.